The Beast of Revelation. Oh, this is a juicy topic, isn't it? But don't get too excited. Don't expect to find the definitive answer here. I've always thought it was a bit unfortunate the book of Revelation found its way into the New Testament canon. It's led to so much wild speculation and misinterpretation, and it continues to do so today. I would argue that it's at the extreme fringes of early Christian thought, but it often takes centre stage in some brands of Christianity today. Again, the noisy versions. There was certainly some hesitation in the early church about accepting the canonicity of Revelation. In the Western Church, it was finally accepted as canonical at the end of the 4th century CE, but it wasn't until some time after the 12th century CE that it finally gained universal acceptance in the Eastern Church. It's clearly very different from the other books of the New Testament, falling into the apocalyptic genre. Apocalyptic literature became widespread in the Jewish community following the return from exile in Babylon, during that intertestamental period. It seemed less and less likely that Israel would rise to any kind of position of political authority in the world, so hopes began to turn to some kind of future radical divine intervention that would restore Israel to its place of predominance. This apocalyptic literature also obviously influenced Jesus and the early Christians, and we see some apocalyptic elements in what are reported as the words of Jesus himself. But the book of Revelation takes all this to a new level. The book was probably written in around 95 to 96 CE, towards the end of the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian. There are enough historical hints in the book to date it really quite precisely. Now, this was a time of significant persecution of Christians. Apocalyptic literature often arises at such stressful times in the life of the community. The book purports to be written by a certain John while in exile on the island of Patmos. This is almost certainly not John the Apostle. If the latter actually wrote the gospel attributed to him, there's very little in common between the theology expressed there and the theology expressed in Revelation. Whether the Apostle John actually wrote either of these books is, of course, open to question, but it seems pretty clear that the same author did not write both books. The question of Revelation's authorship was certainly one factor delaying its acceptance into the canon. The purpose of apocalyptic literature was to give hope to the people at times when things were particularly tough. They were usually times of great suffering and persecution. This was the situation for Christians under Domitian, as it had been under Nero. So it's not surprising that such literature would emerge from the Christian community at this time. Because things were usually going pretty badly on the earthly stage, theological consideration turned to the cosmic stage. Ultimately, God would overcome the forces of evil and bring glory to the faithful. These writings were intended to bring comfort to the faithful. Despite appearances, everything would be okay. Just remain faithful and steadfast. It's easy to see the purpose and impact of this kind of writing in times of great persecution. It's more difficult to see its purpose as Christianity became more widespread and established, which perhaps also explains some of the reluctance to accept the book as canonical. One of the effects of the book is that certain groups of Christians feel it necessary to emphasize the way Christians are being persecuted even today. Although there are indeed places in the world where Christians are being persecuted, it's somewhat laughable seeing comfortable Western middle-class, privileged white Christians claiming that they're being persecuted today, as if their circumstances even remotely resemble those of Christians under Nero or Domitian. Unfortunately, to justify the inclusion and retention of the Book of Revelation in the canon, it becomes necessary to maintain the illusion of persecution. The hysteria just looks ridiculous, though. There I go, persecuting them again. Of course, one thing that should be said about the apocalyptic literature is that it attempted to interpret the events of the day, rather than referring to events in some far distant future. The message of hope only really worked if God's intervention was seen to be imminent. People who read the book of Revelation and other apocalyptic books would have had little or no interest in it if they thought the events referred to were to take place at some time thousands of years in the future. Again, this perhaps explains some of the hesitation about accepting this book as canon. It was largely referring to past events by that time, and the hope for divine intervention hadn't occurred, nor did it seem particularly necessary now that Christianity was reasonably comfortable and had become established. Maybe it was even a little bit embarrassing. All that is really kind of preliminary and introductory. What I really want to do today is to consider one particular figure in the book of Revelation, namely the beast. Of course, throughout history, every generation has identified the beast with one or several prominent historical figures. Of course, it's no different today. I do think there's one irony today, though. If there was ever a figure in history who fit the requirements of being identified as the beast, that will be Donald Trump. Of course, he isn't the beast. He's just a very naughty boy. But it's interesting how somehow he has avoided this particular appellation. Or has he? Are there people out there calling him the beast? Let me know in the comments. Obviously, there will be little agreement over who the book of Revelation was referring to when it spoke of the beast. However, in order for the book to be relevant to its target audience, it was almost certainly a figure of that time rather than some imagined future figure. The people reading the book would probably have recognized who was meant by the beast. Now, of course, the identity of the beast will be controversial even among those who accept that the beast was an historical figure of the day. But the most likely candidate seems to be Nero, so a figure of the near past. Nero had become a source of great fear in the Christian community when he began persecuting Christians following the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. There was also a widespread belief after he died in 68 CE that he would one day return, referred to as Nero Redivivus. Probably he also became a symbol for persecution by the Roman Empire in general. Indeed, it's possible that the beast refers to the Roman Empire rather than to any particular individual. Certainly the empire was the most obvious visible threat at the time. Naturally, numerology has been able to link the number of the beast, 666 or perhaps 616 in some manuscripts, to Nero. But I think we should be rightly sceptical about that. History has shown us time and time again that 666 can be made to relate to anyone. Unfortunately, the symbol and imagery of the book of Revelation is so difficult to interpret that attempts to link the beast directly to Nero look as silly and desperate as the attempts to link the beast to any contemporary political figure, including Donald Trump. You can squeeze anyone into that space if you try hard enough. I suspect the imagery and symbolism is much more difficult for us to interpret than it would have been for the people of the day, who were the book's original target audience. I suspect the author was trying to simultaneously hide and reveal the identity of the beast. Those in the know would probably be able to read the code, much like Swifties today can spot the Easter eggs in Taylor Swift's videos and social media posts, although this is also a good example of how people can sometimes see what isn't actually there. But outsiders who read the book of Revelation might not have been able to decode it. I'm afraid that we today are among the outsiders. It's the book's frustrating ambiguity and obscurity that makes it so popular and so dangerous today. It can be made to serve anyone's agenda. And despite attempts by many evangelical Christians to try to co-opt for themselves the yoke of persecution, they look desperate and sad. If the book of Revelation has any remaining significance for Christians today, it's most definitely not in the attempts to shoehorn contemporary events into the framework of the book's symbolism. This has been failing for 2,000 years now. Just give it up. Pretty much all that's left then is this message. When things get tough, hang in there. If I was still preaching today, that would be about all I could squeeze out of the book of Revelation. And why bother when that's expressed much more simply and clearly elsewhere anyway?